Hey, welcome to the Google Apps Script Forms service, where we're going to be covering the FormApp class. And what this service does is it allows scripts to create, access, and modify Google Forms. So it allows the script to open existing form, modify it, and also create brand new forms. And run those forms, get the URL for the form as well, and generate the form content. So creating a form and how you can create a form from scratch all using Google Apps Script, add items into the form, grid items, multiple choice items, date items, and the various different types of elements that are available, how we can get the items, we can update items within the form, update existing items with new values, and make them required, set up some settings and parameters, adding in items from the form, and also how we can set the feedback for the form, adding and setting the form to be a quiz as well, getting the form response object. And then we've got also several mini projects that we're also going to be working through in this section. And one of them is going to be generating and how you can add form responses to a spreadsheet, so you can get those responses that are submitted from the form object and then depositing that information in the spreadsheet. So this is going to be done with Google Apps Script, and there is an advantage that you can set up your own spreadsheet, set up the column names, and they don't have to be related to the form questions, whereas if you just typically connect your form to a spreadsheet, you need to use the headings that are going to be the questions within the form. Also, the coding and adding responses to the list, generating a mini project that's going to be a math quiz. So it's going to be generated all using Google Apps Script, and we're going to generate the form questions in the form of a math quiz. This is going to be a really fun project to create, and this is all with random data, so we can create multiple quizzes on the fly, all using Google Apps Script, interacting with the Form app and the Form service using Google Scripts. So let's get started working on these projects and more in this section. Hey, in this lesson, we are going to be creating a form from scratch. So go over and log into your Google account, and then go to script.google.com/home/start. And from there, select new project, and we're going to create a brand new standalone script that we're going to be using for this section and using it to create forms. So we'll call it FormApp Tester. Just give it a name, and then we've got the function here, so we're ready to start coding. Let's give the function a name, create a form, and then within the function, so the first thing that we want to do is define a variable, and this is going to be our main form object. So we're going to use the FormApp service in order to create a form. So use the method create, and we're going to create a brand new form. So it does require one parameter, and that's going to be a string value for the title, and I'll just call it my form. And then once you've created the form object, then you're ready to start adding to the form, to constructing the form. So let's take a look and see what we've got within the log for the form object. Run the log. We're going to have to accept permissions, and I'm also going to go over and open up my drive so that we can see the new form object that gets created. So let's accept the permissions in order to have the script interact with the form object. So selecting our Google account that we want to create the form with, and you can also revoke and remove access if you do need to, and that's going over to the myaccount.google.com/permissions, and that will give you a listing of all of the apps that you've given permissions for, and from there you can manage the apps and add and remove permissions. So there's our form object. There's the one that we've created. So when we open it, there's going to be nothing there. There's just a blank form. So we haven't added any questions to the form yet. And that's what we're going to do now. So let's update that, and selecting some items. And then within the form, we can set up an item. And the item can be what type of content that we want to add. So if this particular item, let's give it a title. So using the form object, and what type of item do we want to add? So there's the add checkbox grid item, add checkbox item, add date item, and then there's duration. There's also image item, list items. There's adding text items. So let's go ahead and we're going to just add a text item. And then within the logger log, we'll take a look and we'll see what we've got for item. And so this, when I run the script again, it's going to create a brand new form. So this time what we're going to do is we're going to grab the ID of the form, and then we're going to continue and update the form content. So let's run. And within the execution log, so the first class that we have is the text item. So it's the new text item that we've created. And then also we have the class for the form item. And for the text item, so there's going to be a bunch of classes that are available within the text item. So we can get and set a title, we can add help text, we can make it required, so it's a Boolean value. So do some of that coming up. We'll add to the form, and let's now go over and we'll select the form in a function. And we'll just call it update my form. So that's going to be the function name that we're going to run. And let's select the form object again. So using the FormApp, and we can open by ID, so we can open URL, open by ID. Let's go ahead and open by ID. So we need to specify an ID value, and just like every file within your Google Drive, it's going to have a unique value to it, so they all have unique IDs. So going over to the drive, let's select the form that we want to use, select the ID from the form, and add it in there. And within the logger log, we'll log out the form just to make sure that we have it, and then we'll continue to update and work on the form. So we already have the first question here. So this is the text object that was added. So this is a text item class that was added, and then we can set the parameters here and make updates to it as well. So there's a number of options and different types of updates we can do to that item that we just added. So they are all items that are contained within the form. You can update them to different types of items, as well as you could update the content contained within the items. So go ahead and create a form, and also make a selection of the form by ID, and you can be ready to move on to the next lesson. In the last lesson, we saw how easy it is to create a form. So we're going to continue to work on that existing form and update the items that we have within the form. So we did initially add to the form. So we did add one item. It was just a regular text item. So once you have the form object and you're ready to add to the form, so we can create brand new items, and let's make another item. So we'll call this one item 1. And selecting the form object, and then select the type of item that you want to add. So in this case, let's add some checkboxes. So adding in the checkbox item. And if we go over to the form, you can see here on the right hand side, these are all the different types of items. So you can have multiple choice, checkboxes, drop downs, file upload, linear scales, dates, times, paragraphs. So those are all of the ways to select it visually, and this way is doing it with the code where we can create. So for the item 1, we need to set some choices. So now that we've created the checkbox item, we've got new methods where we set the choices. And setting the choices, so this is expecting an array of choices, and the array is just comma separated out. So within the choices, we select the item, and then we can create the choice object using that method. And let's create the choices, and then just comma separate them, because this is just contained within the array. So whatever number of choices you want to have. And let's do one more here. We're selecting the object, so that's item 1. We use the method create the choice, and then we give the text value to the choice. So 3. So there's 3 items that we're going to select as choice. So let's run and add this to the form. So run to update my form. And then we can refresh it, and it looks like they're already there. So first question is a text question. Then we've got the choices. So these are just checkbox choices that we can have. And then within this editor, we can make some updates to it. We can also preview it if we want. So this is the preview icon here at the top right-hand corner. So this is what our form looks like. So we can check these off and we can add in a text value in the first item there. So let's continue to update the form, and I'll just comment out this, or unless we want to add more checkboxes. So let me pull that information out, or actually what we'll do is I'll just comment it out directly within the code. So we're not going to lose the spot. And let's create another item. So we'll do a const item 1. And the reason that I commented it is that we don't want to keep creating the same ones, because this is going to be continuously adding to the form. And instead of adding to the form, we still want to create a few other items. So we're going to select an add multiple choice item. So selecting that and adding the multiple choice item. And then once we've created the item 2, then we can add to it. So we can set the title of this. So multiple choice. So do you like apps script? Can be the question. And then we can set choices. So we can just string them together. Set choices. So it's just chained within the same object. And you can also skip it. And remove it this way and have that within one statement as well. I usually do prefer to break it apart in case I want to select that particular item. It's a lot easier for me to see that, and in case you want to make some updates afterwards, so you can always select that object. So this way you can chain together. We're setting the title and what choices do we want. And we want to only set the values. So instead of the choices, we're going to set choice values. And then this will take an array where we can add in string values of the available choice values. So let me just write that again. And that's set choice values. And then within here, we're going to add in an array, and this will contain all of the choices. So the first choice will be yes. Second can be no. And third, how about we just do maybe. So those are the choices. You also have an option to add in to show other option. So let's add that in, and this is a Boolean. So set that to true if you want to provide another option. We can also separate the form items with a page break. So let's add page break item. So this is going to create a page break for that item. And then within here, you can set a title for this as well. And then you can have some text there, so this can take string text. Thanks. Let's add a few other items. So const and item number 3, taking the form object and then add. So we've got a whole list of items that we can add. I'm going to go ahead and add a grid item. And for the grid item, so if we go back in the form construction, there's the checkbox grid. And that just kind of transferred that into rows and columns as a grid. And then now if we see the visual of what that's going to look like, so that's going to look like within a grid format. So that's all we're doing, is it's just a different way to display that. And for the grid item, let's go ahead and set a title for it. So item 3, set title. So what do we want as the title for this particular item? So it'll say rate your favorite workspace service. So it'll provide a listing and a grid, so you can make multiple selections there. And I'll show you what this is going to look like. So essentially it's kind of like a rating system there. And let's set the rows that we want for the rating, and then also we're going to set the columns. And then set columns. And both of these require arrays. So we can have as many as we want. And these are just separated string values. So if we have sheets, we have docs, and we have forms. And then for the columns, and then let's add in and then bad. And how about we do one more, since we're going to add a bunch of items, or we can run this and then we can comment them out as well. So let's run and add in these items into the form. And now let's take a look and we'll see what our form looks like. So we did add a page break at the end of this question. So we make our selection, and then we move to the next one where we've got the grid items. So we've got all three of the different workspace services listed here, and then we can provide with the radio buttons our rating of them. And that's what the grid item looks like. And before we conclude this lesson, let's do one more. We'll set a date item. So I'm going to just take this and comment it out. So we're not constructing any more items. And do this as item 4 and form. And adding a date item. And let's set a title for the date item. And let's set the title of, so we'll ask, when did we first start with AppScript? And if we're not interacting with the object that we just created, we don't have to assign a value to it. So over here, we're referencing as item 3, item 2, and then we're setting the title and so on. Here we can do it within one statement. So let's go ahead and update the form. So now it's going to have the date value, and reload the form. And we did have that page break, so we go to the next page, and here's where we've got the date item. So this provides the drop-down date that can be selected, and the user can go through and they can make a selection and then submit their date value. So go ahead, try it out, construct a form, and you could be ready to move on to the next lesson. Let's select our form that we created in the last lesson, or that we updated in the last lesson, and we're going to make some updates to it. So we'll get some information about the form, and we'll just create a function called myForm, and selecting it by its ID. So let's go over to the web URL. We'll grab the ID of the form object. And this is the URL of where you're creating the form. So it's not going to be the URL of where you see the form visually. So those IDs are going to be different. And you can see that as well within the URL, that the ID for the form that's launched and that's on preview is going to be different than the form that we're using in order to construct it. So going back into our script, let's go ahead and we're going to add the ID of the form. And then to get the form object, using the FormApp, and then open by ID, and then we just specify the ID. And then within the logger log, let's just confirm and make sure that we did get the whole form object. And once we have the form object, we can get information about the form. So we've got it within the form class. And if we want to get some information about what's contained within the form, so we can get information about it. So all of this is available. So we can get the confirmation message, get custom closed form, get description, destination ID, destination type, get edit URL. So that's the edit URL objects. And also let's get a few other ones, as this is just basic information about your form object or your form file. So get the edit URL. We can get the editors that are on the form. We can get its ID. So we saw that we've got the ID. We've got also the items that we can get. We can get responses of the form. We can get the title, And also, let's get the summary URL. And what the summary URL is, so this is a URL that can be used to view a summary of the form's responses. So if it's set to true, only the users with edit permissions of the form will be able to access the URL. So it depends on what we've set the set published summary for. So this is just the web URL for that summary. So let's go ahead, and we've already submitted one form response, and let's run the my form, and we'll check out what we've got within these URLs. So this is the edit URL, and this is going to be the same URL that we're using in order to edit it. So it's going to be the exact same here as the edit URL. So that's one way that if you do have the ID, that this way you can link and you can open it up within the edit URL. And then this is where the responses are going. So we've got the listing of the response information. We could also publish the analytics, the responses, and we've got the one response there, and then the answer to what was provided. So that's how you can get some of the details about your form. And so we also did want to, for this form, we want to be able to get all of the items and update some of the items. So let's select the items and use the form object and get items. So what the get items is going to do is going to provide us a list of the items. So for the form, and actually this is we just want to list out the items right now within the log. And I'll also update this to get something else. So if we want to get title, and so let's run this one more time. So the title, there's no title for the form, so we can give the form a title if we want as well. And we can set it with script. So what it does is it lists out the 6 items that are within the form, and that means that we can loop through the items using the for each. So that allows us to select each one of the items individually, and that also allows us to make updates to the item if we want. So let's select the item, and we'll log out each one of the items as an item class, and then that's also going to provide some more methods. I'll comment out these ones because we don't need to see them anymore, as we want to focus on each one of the item classes. So run through, and within the item class, so we're listing out all of the item classes, and these are going to have their own methods. So we can get the type from the item. So let's run that. So we see that the first one's a text, the next is a checkbox grid, there's also multiple choice, page break, grid, date. So those are all of the items that we have within the form. So we want to check to see what type it is, and we're going to check to see the item using the get type. As there's a bunch of different types, and if we want to make an update on it, we should update on specific types. So selecting and checking to see if the type is text, and if it is, then this is going to be a really easy update because then we can just update the item as a text item. So let's select that text item, and that's going to be the class that we're going to pull back. So we're getting the item and then set it as a text item. So you can see here we can select it as and force it into one of the types of classes. And then once you've got it within a class type, then you're going to be able to select on that object all of the different class methods that are available within it. So we're selecting the item as a text item, and we know it is a text item. So let's take that text item, and we can set the title. So we've got all of this, set the validation, set the points if we're providing points to it. So let's go ahead and set a title, updated title. And also we have an opportunity to set it as required if we want. So this requires a Boolean value. So let's set it to true as a Boolean value. And also let's add in some help text into it. And I'll just say whatever. And let's save that. So now we've made some updates to the object. And also, if it's easier to read, you can separate it out on different lines because they're just chaining together the different methods. So what the required does is sets whether a respondent must answer the question. The help text, sometimes called the description text for the layout items like image items, page break items, section header items. So this is text that is set as help text. And then we've just chained it all together, all the different methods. So let's see what happens, and we'll run. And we are trying to update that first form item. So we've got the updated title. And then here we've just saying say whatever. So that's coming from our help text. So that's that help text that's showing up there. Updated title. And let's update it one more time. And save, run. And then once it runs, you see it already gets updated here. And this is also set to required. So if I unclick that, and if I run the form, it should update that and set it to required. So now this form item is going to be a required option. And that's how you can update the items within the form, within existing items that are within the form. And also it's going to update to the preview area as well. So you can see here, we've got the updated new title, and then we've got the help text there that's showing up just underneath the title. In this lesson, we're going to be updating and adding a form, creating a form, and then adding a choice. So set the multiple choice, and then providing feedback to the user. So setting up the feedback action for correct responses within the form. And I'll just call it my form maker, and then within the form. So let's create the form object using the FormApp class and create the form. And I'll just call it my tester. So it's going to bring us and create the form object. And then now that we've got the form object, let's create a few items. So we've got item 1, and then within the form object, we got to add a list item. And then within the title, so let's take the item 1 and set a title for it. So this is really the question that we're asking, the title or the header text. So sometimes it's called the header text. And for this title, let's set that. And I'll just say, do you like AppScript? And let's select the item object again and add in the choices. So it's multiple choice. So let's set the choices. And the choices are going to be expecting to be within an array format where we're going to have an item and create a choice from the item. So create a choice from the item. And the create a choice requires a string value. So let's set this one to yes. And if we want to provide, so if it's incorrect or correct, we're providing a Boolean value. So for incorrect, it's going to be false. For is correct, it's going to be true. So if this is the correct answer, then we set that to be true. And then we can add as many choices as we want. And then these ones are all going to be Boolean of false. So they're not the correct choices, and just comma separate them. And we'll just add one more where it'll be unsure. So this should be a different string value. So we have no, yes, no, unsure. And unsure also is wrong. So once you've created your choices, you can close off the array. And I already do have the closing of the array. And then for the item 1, if we want to have some feedback, we can set the feedback for correct and also feedback for the incorrect. So let's set up the feedback for correct, and then we'll also have some feedback for the incorrect. So within the FormApp, we're going to create a feedback object. And for the feedback object, let's set the display text. So let's move it down to the next line. And then within the feedback that we're creating, let's set some text there. Yes. And if we select, and then let's build the object. So we'll build the feedback content. And before we try it, let's select our form object, and we're going to form it into and set it as a quiz. So that way we can reply back and have the response. So set is quiz true, and that requires a Boolean value. And what this does is this sets whether the form is a quiz. The default for new forms is false. So graded questions are only allowed in quizzes. So setting this to false will cause all grading options to be removed. So quiz settings are only available in the new forms UI. Making a form quiz will opt the form into the new UI. So basically what it's doing is it's just formatting it into the new quiz format. And then let's take the item 1 and set the feedback for the incorrect. So the format for this is going to be the same as we just saw with the correct. So setting the FormApp and create the feedback object. And within the feedback object, we want to set some text. And this will just say, oh no, for the feedback. And then at the end, we just build it using the build method in order to apply and create it. And then that's going to be wrapped within the incorrect. So let's go ahead and run this and call it myTester2. So we can go to the drive, select the form that we just created. And now whenever we look into the answer key, so we've got feedback for correct answers, feedback for incorrect answers, and we do have yes as true. So that has the Boolean value. So that's going to be the correct one, and that's going to get the feedback of just yes. You can update it within the form interface as well, where you can update the correct answers and have different feedback, whatever you want, adding in the feedback and updating it. And then as well, you can set the feedback as we just did when you're creating the form. Let's select one of the existing forms, and we're going to look at the responses for this form. So selecting the form, we don't have any responses yet, so let's go through and create some responses so that we do have some responses to go by. And then we're going to select the form information, and there we've got some responses there. So we want to pull this information out of the form. And we'll create the function that's going to wrap the form responses, and setting up the form object. So using the FormApp and then open by ID. We're going to select it by ID, and now let's define the ID value. So it's the one coming from the URL, and make sure that we do have the proper form. So within the logger log, let's take the form object and we'll get the published URL of the form. And now let's run it and check the responses. So there's the published URL of the form. So we do have a connection, and we are able to work with the form. So let's now get the responses within the form. And now we can get back the responses. So this is going to return back an array of items. So using the form object, we want to get the responses. We also can get just the response. And that would just be the single response that we want to get back. If we know which response we want to get back, we can get the response back. But in this case, we want to get the whole array of responses. So we want to return back all of the responses. So let's list that within the log and run it. So now we've got the form response. So we've got the 3 form response objects. So let's loop through the responses and get. And that's actually for each. And this is the form response object. So I'll just call it res and give it an index and then the arrow format as we loop through. And then within the log, we're going to log out each one of the form responses. So there's the form response class. And now within the form response, we can select the response value, and we can log those out. So getting the item for the response, and we'll log out, actually we're going to be already logging out what the item responses are. So let's run through that, and that's also going to be an array. of item responses there. So we've got the 3 item responses, and we only have just the one, but again, it is an array. So if we want to get back the item response, then we'd have to loop through the item responses. So let's set up a variable for that. So that's the item response, and actually responses. So I'm not going to add another s, but that's going to be plural. So it's returning back all the item responses, and then using for each, we can pull back each one of the item responses. So this can be an item. And within the logger log, now let's take a look at the item. So this is going to be the methods that we can get, where within the item response, we can get the item, we can get the title, and we can get the response information. So let's see what we've got here. And we've got the item response there, so that's logged out separately, so it's no longer within the array. And if we want to get the item response, we can get the item from the response. And for the item, we can get the help text, we can get the title, or it should be get title, not set title. So get title. And within the logger log, so now we're getting the title of the item. And then also for the item, we can get the feedback for the item. We can get a score, we can get a response. We can also set feedback and set a score. So let's get the response, and this is going to be the user's response. And within the log item, and let's get the feedback as well. So this was the message that we had. So now let's run through this and check what we've got within the log. So we've got the first question, do you like AppScript? Yes. And the feedback response, no. Do you like AppScript? No. Do you like AppScript? Yes. So we can track all of this information, and we can generate it into a spreadsheet if we want. So let's do that in the next lesson. We'll get the responses and we'll create a spreadsheet of all of the responses. And we don't need that feedback because what was being returned back there was null, so I just removed the feedback. Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to be doing a project where we're going to be sending the data, so querying all of the response data from the form and then dropping it into a spreadsheet. So I know there is already an option within the Google Forms, so you can go up and you can create a spreadsheet with the data. And one of the downsides of it is that the data gets structured in a way that each one of the titles then becomes the heading for the form, and it doesn't provide you the flexibility that you might sometimes need. So creating your own spreadsheet from the response data sometimes is an advantage because you can structure it the way you want it and then also display the data that you want to display it. So I'm going to be updating the my responses that we looked at last time, and we're going to be doing quite a bit of the same stuff here where we're getting the ID, the form, the responses, and then we're logging out all of the responses. And then we're also looping through the response. And the difference is that we're going to be connecting a spreadsheet. So let's go ahead and we'll create a new spreadsheet. Under the new spreadsheets, create a blank spreadsheet, and we can also generate a spreadsheet as well. So maybe we can do that, and instead of having a spreadsheet, we'll create a spreadsheet that's going to generate the response and add the response data. So create a function, make a sheet, and then within the make a sheet, let's select the spreadsheet object. And using the spreadsheet app, we're going to create a brand new spreadsheet. And I'll call it form data. So we'll drop the contents in there. And then within the spreadsheet, actually, let's get the sheet that we want to work with. So within the spreadsheet object, and we'll just insert a sheet. So using the insert sheet method, we'll insert a brand new sheet and then take the sheet object and let's set a name for the sheet. So set name, and the name for the sheet can be the form data. Give it whatever name that you want, whatever name makes sense. So that's created the sheet. And what we want to do is we want to append the first row for the sheet. So append a row, and this can be used as the headers for the sheet data. So what we want to do is just have the question and then the response from the user. So those are the two pieces of data that we're returning back. And then let's return back the sheet object. And then with the make a sheet, let's create the sheet here. So setting up a variable for the sheet object, and then we're going to make a sheet, so we're going to return it back as a sheet object, and then that's going to allow us to append a row, and we're going to append a row of data, and the row of data that's just going to be this information here from the title. And when we're appending a row, we need to keep it within an array format, so an array, and then also let's append it with the response and save. So what's going to happen here is that as we run the myResponses function, we're going to create a sheet there with the new make a sheet function. So it's going to generate the sheet, and then from the returning back the sheet object, it's going to then append to each row with the data that we just saw within the log. So let's try it and run the function. And we need to accept permissions because the app now is going to be interacting with the sheet app service, and we need to provide permissions to interact and create content on the drive. So once we run the script and the execution is complete, we should be able to go over to our Google Drive, select the newly created sheet, and we should have a listing of the data within the form data. So that's where we've got all of the responses. So we've got question and the response, so questions for each one of the forms, and then the responses that were logged for those forms. So now that we have the data and it's going into the brand new sheet, we can apply some formulas to here, and we can make use of the data as needed. So it's one of the benefits of doing it this way, where we're creating our own sheet and then we're structuring the data the way that we want it presented within the spreadsheet. So in this lesson, we do have a project where we're going to be creating a math quiz. So this is a great little quiz exercise to get more familiar with how you can create some questions on the fly. So we've got some random math values that we're going to be generating and generating questions, and then also providing the responses. And also the questions are going to be a randomized order of the questions. So let's go ahead and make the quiz. And then when we go over to the drive, so we just made the brand new quiz, and then within this quiz, we've got a listing of all of the math questions. So 8 plus 12 equals, so that's the question. When you select on it, you can see that within the feedback, we've got the correct answer. So this is a multiple choice quiz, and the questions are all going to be within, the right answers are within a random order. And this is a great way to become more familiar what you can do with the Form app and the Form service in Google Scripts. So we are going to be generating a quiz. So make quiz will be the function that we're going to run. And we're going to create a brand new form. So let's create the form object, and using the FormApp class, create the quiz. And we'll just call it quiz 1. And so what this is going to be, this is going to be a math quiz. So let's take the form object and set is quiz. So we'll set it to be true. So enabling this, it's going to be enabled if the form is going to be set to be true. And now let's generate some questions. And we need some random values here. So creating a function, random value, so whatever the minimum and maximum is that we want for the value. And then we're going to return back using math floor, and then a value of math random function, and then multiply it by the maximum. And if we want the maximum to be exclusive of the minimum, so we'll take the math max minus the minimum, and then add the minimum into that. So just double check. And this should generate a random number that's exclusive of the minimum number. If we want to include the minimum number, then we could increase it and add 1 to it. So it's going to then include the minimum number. And we should also update the minimums and the maximums. So set the minimum and using the math ceiling for the minimum. And for the maximum, we can use the math floor, and that's going to take in the maximum value. So now we should be able to generate some random numbers. So let's set those up. So val1 is going to be, and let's create the function as random num. So selecting the minimum and the maximum value. And then also selecting for val2, as we're going to have 2 numbers within this quiz, and we'll do the same thing. And also let's select and set the answer. So the answer value is going to be val1 plus val2. So that's going to be our answer for the questions. So now let's create a loop that's going to set how many questions we want to create. So starting at 0, and we'll loop through while I is less than 10. So this will be a 10 question quiz, just a simple math quiz where we're going to be adding together. And as we loop through, we're going to add items to the form. So let's set up and we'll create our item. So using the form object, add list item. And I want to create an array of the options that we have. So when we do have the choices, and then we're going to randomize the order of the array. So this is just a temporary array that we're going to be constructing. And then within this array, we'll take the array object and push into the array an object using item create choice. And the first choice is just going to be whatever the answer is. And that's going to return back a Boolean value of true. So taking the value of the answer and let's force this into a string. So it's expecting a string format for there. So it doesn't take a number, so it's expecting a string, so we're going to force it into a string. And then let's create a few choices as well that are going to be false. And this can just be a random number value. And actually it needs to be a string as well. So do a quick loop. And just create a temporary string value using the random number. And then we can use that temporary string value, and this answer should be false. And we'll just double check just to make sure, because we don't want to run into a situation where we've got the random number is equal to answer. And we'll double check and make sure that it's not equal to temp. And then that means that we'll add it into the options. So now we're looping through and we're creating the choice array. So we want to also randomize the array order. So you can do an array sort. And we'll do it as we are pushing the items into the array. So we'll make this value, and we're going to do that as we're looping through. So let's set a Boolean value to false. And this Boolean value can then be used to toggle whether we've added in the correct answer. And we'll do a check here. And this is going to be checking to see whether the Boolean's been placed, as well as we're going to create a random value that can possibly place the correct answer in this slot, in this order, and within the array. So doing a random number value, so that will provide some odds where we'll do a random value number and check to see if that random value number is less than 10. So it's about a 1/3% chance. And if it is, then we're going to push the item into the array. And we're also going to set the Boolean to be true. So that means that we've already deposited the correct answer. So also, we're going to do a second condition, and Boolean is false. And then after we do the loop, we want to check to see if Boolean is still false, then we're going to deposit the correct answer into the array. So no matter what, we'll get the correct answer into the array, and it's going to be positioned at a random position. And you could also randomize the array as well. So now we're able to set the choices. So once we've constructed the array, let's take the item and set the choices. And now we have the array that contains the object information to set the choices. So that's going to be contained within the array. And let's save that. And we can also provide feedback. So within the item, set feedback for correct. And let's use the FormApp. And we'll create feedback and set the text in the feedback to be whatever the correct answer was, and then we'll build the feedback content. So the correct answer was the value of ants, which is going to be a string value. So let's save that, and that should create 10 questions for us within a quiz. So let's try it out, run the code. And go into the drive. And now we've got a quiz 1. So we've got a number of questions, and it actually didn't load the question information, so we need to do some debugging on that. Let's select the form by ID. So it is set to be a quiz, so that was correct. And we are just missing the question data. And we do have the answer key, that the correct answer was 51. But that doesn't help because it didn't set the text. So let's see what happened with our title. And we didn't actually set a title for the item. So let's do that. We'll take the item and set a title. And within the title, let's take the val1. And these all need to be strings as well. So I'll create the title as an object with a string value. So we use the template literals and val1 plus val2 and equals. So this will be our string value. And then we'll set the title as whatever is being returned back for title. So let's try that one more time and run and create the quiz. So we can remove the previous one and open up the new quiz. So now we've got 31 plus 17. And we can see what the answer is. So it's 48. And we're able to generate a really nice, neat quiz. So again, see the answers there. And actually, all of our questions have the same answer. So we need to figure out what happened there as well. And if we look as we're looping through, we need to bring these into the loop. So that way we can have different answers, unless of course you want them all to have the same answer. And let's try that one more time and just see how that works and generate the quiz. And you can also do some troubleshooting and debugging within the log and break apart the function if you need to. So let's take a look at this new quiz. So now we do have a quiz. They do have different answers. And also notice as well, the answers aren't always within the first question, so they are randomized where they're positioned. And now we can provide the quiz to a user where they could select and answer and respond to the quiz, make a submission. And if we want them to be able to see the feedback, go under the quizzes, under the settings in the top right hand corner, and then allow them to see the immediate after each submission. They can also see the correct answers, the missed questions, and save. Now let's go back in and try that one more time. So now we've got the quiz. And when they submit it, they can view the accuracy, so they can see what they got correct and what they got incorrect for this math quiz. And that has to actually be set within the quiz. So once you make it, if you want them to be able to see the answers, go up to settings, quizzes, and then just check off and select what you want them to be able to see when they complete the quiz and when they're interacting with the quiz. So as we saw within the previous lessons, we can do quite a bit with forms. So we can create forms as well as we can select existing forms and update the content contained within the form. So it allows us to create, access, and modify Google Forms. The script also allows us to open existing forms or create brand new forms. So depending on what our needs are, and sometimes it's easier just to generate a brand new form, and in other cases you might want to be updating it so that you can update the content for the users. But keep in mind, when you are updating the items within the form, then the responses are not going to be consistent. So when you are selecting a form, you need to select whatever the form parent is, whether you're creating it, and you can do that, or whether it already exists. So you can do that with the FormApp. So you can open the form, or you could create a brand new form. And this just requires the string name. So once you create the form, then you've got a number of options within the methods where you could set the title. You could also set up some of the requirements like the login. You can shuffle questions as well. So that's a really good one, and this is requiring a Boolean value. So every time the form loads, the questions are not going to always be within the same order. So this is a really good option to set to true, and the order of the questions on each page of the form is going to be randomized. If it's false, it's always going to be within the same order that the items are set in. And so once you create the form, you can also create an item. And the item, usually I create it as an object, and then within the form you can get the existing items. So if you're interacting with an existing item, or you can add various items. So for the adding of the items, there's quite a lot of options here. So you can do text item, time item, video item, scale item. So a number of options for the different types of items. So let's add a scale item. And within the scale item, it pens a new question item that allows the respondent to choose the option from a numbered sequence of radio buttons. So setting up that item. And then also for the items, it's always good to set a title. And we'll pick a number there within the scale. And for the item itself, we can set the title, but we also need to set the bounds since this is going to be a scale. So what numbers do we want to start with, and what numbers do we want to set it to? So if we're doing 1 to 10, we could also, the lowest number can be 0, or it could be 1. So typically if we're doing pick a number, 1 to 10 would be pretty good. So we've added the scale to the form, and that means that we're ready to create it. So let's go ahead and create it. And there's our brand new form. And some of the options we don't have available within the apps script. So you can go over to the settings in the top right hand corner of the form that you just created, the brand new form file. And then within the quizzes, so you can make it a quiz, and also how the respondents get it. There's also the presentation. So we are able to set to shuffle question order. So that was one of the methods that was available. We can also add a progress bar. So that's also an option that we can set with code. So from the form, and we can set a progress bar. So this as well we can set. So a lot of them are available, and this was also expecting a Boolean value. So what it's going to do is it's going to check these values. And then the general, we can also set the limit one response, collect email addresses, also edit after submit, see summary, charts, and text responses, so what the respondents can see. So we can set some of this stuff as well within the form object, and that's directly within the parent. And then for the questions, these are the items. So the items can be various different items that you can select and update, and then each one of them has their own parameters that you need to set. So quite a bit that you can do with forms, and I do suggest that you just try it out and check out the different items. And within the pop-up here information, they oftentimes do have examples of the various methods and also the different parameters that are needed for the methods to run. And that's always a great way to become more familiar with what you can do with the form service and what you can do within the various classes that are available within the Form app.